Hey, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about special right triangles. We've already covered right triangles and finding the length of the sides of a triangle using our Pythagorean theorem. Remember, it only works when we have a right triangle and when we have the measurement or the lengths of two sides of your right triangle. Now here you would think, well, how could I use the Pythagorean theorem on this one? I only have one side measure. Well, if you look at the markings, that tells us that they are congruent. So therefore you have two measures. Okay. So if one of the legs is 5, then the other leg is also 5. Okay, we call that isosceles. And anytime you have an isosceles right triangle, the two acute angles are both going to be 45 degrees. So that's a 45, 45, 90 triangle. It's talking about the measure of the angles. Okay, but we need to be able to recognize our 45, 45, 90 triangle. We could recognize it by the markings. We could recognize by, okay, the two legs are congruent here. Here we have the two angles that are congruent. Then we have the actual numbers, 45, 45 in the angles for the angle measure. Or we could have the right triangle and one angle measure. That's 45. Okay, all of these, any of these could come up and you are to recognize that, hey, this is a 45, 45, 90, and I will need to use the 45, 45 degree formulas. Okay, so once again, look for the sides being marked, the legs. Look for a 45 in the angle measure or 2, or look for the congruent symbols on the angle markings. Now, because this is such a special triangle, the 45, 45, 90, we have special formulas. In this triangle, we have that the legs are congruent. Okay, so the leg is equal to the leg. So therefore, if one leg measure is 5, then the other one is also 5. Okay, now, how do we find the hypotenuse? Well, we have a shortcut because this is a special right triangle. It's our 45, 45. How do we know? Because we have the two legs are congruent, which means that the acute angles are 45. All right, so when that's the case, then the hypotenuse is equal to whatever the measure of the leg is times the square root of 2. Okay, so our answer for the length of the hypotenuse is pretty simple. Since the hypotenuse is equal to the leg times the square root of 2, I'm just going to abbreviate. I'll even abbreviate even more with just a variable later. And then since the length of the leg is 5, then all I have to do is take the length of the leg and multiply that times the square root of 2. Okay? So we'll do the same thing for B. The leg is equal to the leg, so therefore we have the other leg is 3. And what is our hypotenuse? The hypotenuse is also the leg times the square root of 2. Okay, so since the length of the leg is 3, all we have to do is multiply the square root of 2. And that's the length of our hypotenuse. Simple. Easy cheesy. All right. What about C? Once again, we have the two markings. So the other leg is also 1. which tells us what? That the hypotenuse is whatever the leg is times the square root of 2. All right, you don't have to put a 1 in front of the square root of 2, but just to emphasize that it is the leg times the square root of 2, I'm going to go ahead and write the 1. Okay, so once again, the legs are congruent, 1 and 1, and all we have to do to get the hypotenuse is to take the leg and multiply it times the square root of 2. So our objective for today is to be able to recognize a 45, 45, 90 triangle, and to be able to use the 45, 45, 90 to find the missing links of the right triangle. So now what we're going to do is going to go over several different types of problems that you will encounter when dealing with the special right triangles and our radicals. Okay, once again, our formulas, the legs are equal, and the hypotenuse is equal to the leg times the square root of 2. So we know that this is first we have to recognize that it's a 45, 45. We have right and 145, so therefore we know we can use it. Okay, so that means that the other leg is also 3, and the y is 3 square roots of 2. All right, but what about this one? In this case, we're given the hypotenuse. So anytime you're given a leg, to get the hypotenuse, you multiply square root of 2. And when you're given the hypotenuse, you do the reverse. You divide by the square root of 2. Okay? So when we're looking for the length of the legs, we're going to divide by the square root of 2. So once again, just remember, hypotenuse divide, leg multiply. Okay, so the hypotenuse in this case was 10 square roots of 2. Okay, so what we have to do, that's equal to the leg. Let's just go ahead and write that in. That's equal to the leg. And remember that our hypotenuse is equal to the leg times the square root of 2. So remember, when given the hypotenuse, we're going to divide. So we have 10 square roots of 2. And we're going to divide. Let me make that a fraction. And square roots of 2. And then we're going to divide by the square root of 2. Okay, so notice that when we divide, we have both square root of 2 in the top and the bottom, so it cancels each other out. And our leg is 10. Okay, so remember, anytime we have the hypotenuse, 10 square roots of 2, we divide by square root of 2. Okay, the third type of problem that we'll go over, sometimes the leg this looks a little bit different. In this case, the leg is 2 square roots of 3. So it actually, instead of being a whole number, it has a radical there. Okay, but don't let that scare you, because we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to use the exact same thing. The hypotenuse is equal to the leg times the square root of 2. Okay, on this particular problem, make sure that you can identify the legs and the hypotenuse. A good thing to do is to just trace if you would just trace the right angle, then that would tell you that those are the legs, and those would have to be the same length. So trace the angle, and those two sides are your legs. The other side is the hypotenuse. So here you're given the leg and asked to find the hypotenuse. So that means that you're going to multiply the leg times the square root of 2. Now in this case, it's a radical. So don't be afraid. Okay, so to get the hypotenuse, we take the leg, and the leg is 2 square roots of 3, and multiply it times the square root of 2. Now if you could just do this much, that'll be great. Okay, that at least lets me know that you know the geometry. Okay, but go ahead and take it a little further if you can. Remember, we multiply the outside times the outside. There's only 1 on the outside, so we'll put 2. Then we write our radical, and then we multiply everything that's on the underneath. 3 times 2, that gives us 6. Okay. So your answer to this problem is the legs, the one that you traced. The leg is the same. So the leg is 2 square roots of 3. And the hypotenuse, remember we multiplied the 2 square roots of 3 times the square root of 2, and we got 2 square roots of 6.
Pardon me, teacher. Due to testing this morning, we are doing the announcements right now. Good morning, Texas. This is Omar Hernandez. Today is March 23rd. Would you please rise up and pledge allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now would you please remain standing for the salute of the Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Now would you please be seated for a moment of silence. Our San Francisco High School mission statement is, at San Francisco High School, we will respect ourselves and others, embrace cultural differences, and maximize student potential to ensure that all students are prepared for the responsibilities of college, career, and/or the military. We do not have any other announcements, so I'm just going to close it off.
Okay, so remember that whenever you are given the leg and you're asked to find the other leg, it's the same, 45, 45. 2 squares of 3, so y is 2 squares of 3. And then we identify that x is the hypotenuse. And remember that we always take the leg, no matter what it is, 2 square roots of 3, and we multiply it times 2. Okay? So it doesn't matter what it is, we multiply it. So this shows what we did. We're looking for the hypotenuse. It's equal to the leg times the square root of 2. So we just take